The grand concourse of first contact gleamed with an almost painful intensity. Polished surfaces reflected the deliberately dramatic lighting, creating an ambience that Leo Maxwell found both overwhelming and slightly ridiculous. The massive space station, constructed specifically for this historic meeting between Earth and the mysterious Xylos Collective, had all the subtlety of a casino wedding chapel. "Move that display 2 meters to the left," barked a corporate executive in an impeccably tailored suit. "The holographic projection needs to be visible from the main entrance. First impressions are everything." Leo ducked his head and continued untangling a mess of cables. As a mid-level logistics coordinator for Struggle Tech, a floundering earth science corporation, he wasn't important enough to be part of the diplomatic entourage. His job was to make sure the food dispensers didn't short-circuit and the translation servers stayed operational. Essential work, but hardly glamorous. "Is the universal translator working?" someone called out from across the Grand Hall. "Running final diagnostics now," Leo replied, though he doubted anyone was actually listening to him. He watched as representatives from Earth's governments and corporations scurried about, arranging their displays of technological achievement, artistic masterpieces, and resource proposals. The riches everyone expected would entice the advanced alien civilization. Leo allowed himself a small, sardonic smile. The desperation was palpable. Earth's various factions were competing not just with each other, but with their collective insecurities. What could humans possibly offer a species capable of interstellar travel? The answer, apparently, was everything they could think of, arranged in the most ostentatious manner possible. "Maxwell," his supervisor's voice cut through his thoughts. "Where's the backup power supply for the Eastern Quadrant refreshment station?" "In transit, sir," Leo replied automatically, though he had no idea where it actually was. He lost track of it somewhere between the diplomatic quarters and the main hall. Just one more crisis to manage before the Xylos arrived. As Leo crawled beneath a display table to check a faulty connection, he contemplated the absurdity of his situation. Here he was, on the edge of perhaps the most significant event in human history, worrying about power supplies and translation servers. The cosmic joke wasn't lost on him. "They're coming." The announcement rippled through the hall, and Leo banged his head on the underside of the table in his haste to emerge. He rubbed the sore spot as he stood, taking a position near the wall where he hoped to be inconspicuous while still able to witness history unfold. The entrance of the Xylos delegation silenced the buzz of human activity. Even from his position at the periphery, Leo could see why. They moved with an ethereal grace that suggested they might be barely touching the ground. Their leader, introduced as Lyra, appeared youthful by human standards, but with subtle non-human features that created an uncanny valley effect. Patterns on her skin that seemed to shift with her movements, eyes of an impossible color that changed depending on the angle of light, and movements that were just a little too fluid to be natural. Leo watched as Lyra observed the human presentations with detached curiosity. The corporate executives launched into their rehearsed pitches. Government representatives outlined resource-sharing proposals. Artists unveiled works created specifically for this occasion. Lyra and her delegation moved from display to display, showing polite interest but no particular enthusiasm for any of Earth's technological or material offerings. The proceedings culminated in the Grand Hall, where Earth's leaders waited anxiously for Lyra to select a technology, a resource treaty, or a corporate partner. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as Lyra scanned the crowd with an intensity that was almost frightening. Leo, who had been distracted trying to fix a malfunctioning coffee dispenser, looked up just in time to see Lyra's gaze lock onto him. Her eyes widened slightly, and her skin patterns pulsed with a new rhythm. Before anyone could react, she raised a slender arm and pointed directly at him. "I want him," she said, her voice clear through the universal translator. For a moment, Leo thought he'd misheard. He glanced behind him, certain she must be indicating someone else. But there was no one there, just the blank wall of the Grand Hall. The silence that followed was absolute. Hundreds of eyes turned toward Leo, who stood frozen, a coffee filter still in his hand. Government officials exchanged bewildered looks. Corporate executives muttered in confusion, and Lyra continued to point at him, unwavering. "There must be some mistake," someone finally said, breaking the silence. "This is just a logistics coordinator." "No mistake," Lyra replied, her voice carrying easily across the hall. "I want him." Security personnel approached Leo with obvious uncertainty, as if they weren't sure whether to arrest him or escort him with honor. Leo himself remained rooted to the spot, his mind racing through possible explanations. Was this a test? A joke? Had he unknowingly triggered some alien cultural response? As he was gently but firmly escorted away, leaving behind a room full of stunned dignitaries and meaningless presentations, one thought kept circling through Leo's mind. Of all the people in that room, brilliant scientists, powerful leaders, visionary artists, why on earth would an advanced alien species want him? The elegant quarters Leo found himself in bore little resemblance to the utilitarian cabin he'd been assigned on the station. The walls emitted a soft, organic glow that adjusted to his movements, and the furniture seemed to subtly shift to accommodate his posture whenever he changed position. It was like living inside an organism that anticipated his needs before he was even aware of them. Despite the luxury, Leo felt distinctly uncomfortable. The golden cage metaphor kept springing to mind, though this cage was more like an art installation made of living light than anything with actual bars. He paced the room, examining every corner for some clue as to why he'd been brought here. "Does the accommodation displease you?" Leo spun around to find Lyra, standing in what he had assumed was a solid wall just moments ago. Up close, she was even more disconcerting, her skin patterns shifting like oil on water, her eyes cycling through colors that had no names in human language. "The room is fine," Leo said, defaulting to the nervous humor that had always been his shield, "though I usually prefer accommodations with obvious exit doors." The translator must have captured his tone, because Lyra's skin flickered in what might have been amusement. The interfaces adapt to expectation patterns. You expected a wall, so you perceived one. Right. Obviously. Leo rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not anyone important. I'm just the guy who makes sure the coffee machines work." Lyra tilted her head. "Importance is a subjective value assignment. What metrics are you using to determine your lack of importance?" Leo blinked. Even accounting for translation peculiarities, this was not the response he'd expected. "Well, for starters, I'm not a diplomat, scientist, or CEO. I don't make decisions that affect humanity's future. I'm a mid-level logistics coordinator for a struggling tech company that couldn't even afford a prime display spot at the concourse." "Fascinating." Lyra moved closer, studying him as one might examine an unusual specimen. "You define importance through hierarchical position and decision-making authority, don't you? I mean, you're obviously the leader of your delegation." "I am a resonance focal point," she corrected, "a node through which patterns can be harmonized." Leo suppressed a sigh. This was going nowhere. "Why am I here, Lyra? Why me? Is this some kind of test? Do I have a rare genetic marker? Am I carrying a disease you're studying? What?" Lyra's skin patterns slowed their shifting. "You exhibited an intriguing pattern in neural background noise. A clean signal amidst performance intention. I have no idea what that means." Most humans at the concourse were performing, creating artificial patterns to impress or manipulate. You were simply solving problems as they arose, with no performance layer. She made a gesture with her hands that seemed to encompass his entire being. "Your resonance frequency is instructive." Leo ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "So, you abducted me because I wasn't trying to impress you? That's pretty much typical of my luck." "You're not a prisoner," Lyra said, though the lack of obvious exits somewhat undermined this statement. "You are a baseline, a reference point." Leo sat heavily on what appeared to be a chair. "And I need to be a baseline because, to understand a species, one must separate signal from noise. All the displays, all the presentations, they were noise. Deliberate constructs designed to create specific impressions. You're closer to signal. As the conversation continued, Leo felt the initial shock giving way to a strange, sort of existential horror. While he'd been worrying about coffee machines, he'd somehow been selected as humanity's representative to an advanced alien species. He wasn't equipped for this. He hadn't been briefed. He didn't have talking points. "I have a cat," he blurted out, his mind jumping to the practical concerns of everyday life. "Back on Earth. Who's going to feed her? In my apartment. I didn't turn the heat down before I left. And my job. Am I fired now? Do I still have health insurance?" Lyra observed his outburst with what seemed like genuine interest. "These are your primary concerns?" "Well, they're my immediate concerns," Leo admitted. "My long-term concern is being abducted by an alien for reasons I still don't understand." "Not abducted. Selected." Lyra gestured, and a portion of the wall became transparent, revealing the vastness of space beyond. "Your perspective is valuable precisely because it is unfiltered by diplomatic or corporate objectives." Leo stared out at the stars, feeling smaller than he ever had before. He was just one human, not even a particularly accomplished one, suddenly thrust into a situation with potential consequences for all of humanity. And all because he'd been focused on fixing a coffee machine rather than impressing anyone. The irony was not lost on him. As Leo continued to stare out at the stars, Lyra activated something on her wrist. A holographic display appeared in the air between them, showing what appeared to be news feeds and communications from the human delegation. "Your selection has created significant disturbance patterns," she observed. Leo scanned the headlines visible in the hologram. "Unknown tech worker chosen by Xylos. Government scramble to understand alien selection. What does Maxwell know that we don't?" "Great," he muttered. "I've become a conspiracy theory. Your species appears to be constructing narratives to explain the unexplained," Lyra noted. "Is this common?" "It's practically our national pastime," Leo sighed. "No one likes random events. Everyone wants patterns and reasons, even if they have to invent them." As he watched the swirling speculation about himself, Leo felt more isolated than ever. In the luxurious alien quarters, surrounded by technology he couldn't comprehend, he was completely out of his depth. No amount of troubleshooting experience could help him navigate this situation. He was just a man who fixed things, practical, everyday things. Now he was expected to be something more, and he had no idea how to begin. Lyra led Leo through a corridor that seemed to materialize as they walked, the walls and ceiling forming just ahead of their steps and dissolving behind them. It was like moving through a living dream, and it took all of Leo's concentration not to stumble in disorientation. "Where are we going?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "To the observational node," Lyra replied. A place of pattern recognition. That didn't clarify much, but Leo had given up expecting straightforward answers. After several minutes of walking through the ever-forming passage, they emerged into a spherical chamber. The walls, floor, and ceiling were indistinguishable, all covered in what appeared to be a projection of space. Not just stars and planets, but swirling data patterns, energy flows, and connections that Leo's brain struggled to interpret. "What am I looking at?" he asked, his voice hushed despite himself. "A fraction of what we perceive," Lyra said, "adjusted to approximate human visual processing capabilities." Leo turned slowly, taking in the overwhelming display. "It's beautiful." "Is that your primary response?" Lyra seemed genuinely curious. Not confusion or fear. Leo considered this. "Those two. But mostly I'm struck by how it makes me feel small and big at the same time. Like I'm seeing connections I always knew existed, but couldn't perceive. An interesting resonance." Lyra's skin patterns shifted to a slower, more harmonious rhythm. Many species respond with distress when first exposed to multidimensional data visualization. Leo shrugged. "When you spend enough time fixing broken systems, you develop an appreciation for seeing how things connect. Though I usually just have wiring diagrams, not whatever this is." Lyra gestured, and the swirling patterns around them shifted. "This is why you were selected, Leo Maxwell." "What?" "Because I can appreciate pretty light shows. Because you see patterns and connections without the filter of preconception. Because your mind seeks to understand rather than to control. Leo laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the spherical chamber. You got the wrong guy. I'm not some deep thinker. I'm just a technician who solves problems as they come up. Precisely. Lyra's eyes settled on a color that reminded Leo of sunlight through autumn leaves. When we observe your species preparing for first contact, we saw layer upon layer of intent. Performance. Calculation. Everyone attempting to appear as something more knowledgeable, more powerful, more artistic. Everyone except you. I was just doing my job, Leo protested. Without pretense. Solving real problems with practical solutions. Your neural patterns were clean, uncontaminated by performance anxiety or status competition. Lyra moved closer to him. We need this. A baseline of authentic human thought and behavior. Leo frowned. Why? What's the point of all this? My species must decide on the nature of our long-term relationship with humanity. Intervention, observation, integration, or complete withdrawal. We cannot make this decision based only on what your leaders and representatives choose to show us. Her skin rippled in what might have been the Xylo's equivalent of emphasis. We need to understand what humans truly are beneath the performance layers. The weight of this statement hit Leo like a physical blow. And you think I can help with that? Me? The guy who couldn't even remember to turn down his apartment thermostat before leaving Earth? Especially you, Lyra said, because you're not trying to be anything other than what you are. Leo ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd never managed to break. No pressure or anything. Do you accept this role? Lyra asked. You may decline. We do not force cooperation. Leo looked around at the swirling cosmos projected around them, then back at the alien being who had, for reasons he still found bewildering, selected him from all of humanity for this bizarre cultural exchange. What exactly would I have to do? Share your perspective. React authentically to what we show you. Help us understand the unfiltered human experience. Leo took a deep breath. Part of him wanted nothing more than to go back to his ordinary life of fixing machines and feeding his cat. But another part, a part he hadn't known existed until this moment, recognized the extraordinary opportunity before him. I'll do it, he said finally, but I can't promise I'll be what you're looking for. That, Lyra replied, her skin patterns brightening, is exactly why you are suitable. Over the following days, Leo found himself engaged in the strangest cultural exchange program imaginable. Lyra introduced him to Xylo's artifacts, historical simulations, and ethical dilemmas, carefully observing his reactions to each. At first, Leo felt self-conscious, aware that his responses were being analyzed and potentially influencing the future relationship between humans and Xylos. But as time passed, he fell back on his natural problem-solving approach, addressing each situation with the practical mindset that had apparently caught Lyra's attention in the first place. When presented with a complex Xylo's philosophical concept about the interconnectedness of consciousness across space-time, Leo compared it to dealing with the office bureaucracy at Struggle Tech, how a decision made in one department inevitably affected everyone else, often in unexpected ways. It's like when accounting decides to change the expense report system without telling anyone, he explained. Suddenly, nobody gets reimbursed, morale tanks, and 3 months later, your best engineer quits to join a competitor. Everything's connected, just not always in ways you can predict. Lyra's skin patterns pulsed with what Leo had come to recognize as intense interest. You reduce a complex metaphysical concept to an everyday workplace scenario, yet the core pattern remains intact. Fascinating. When shown a piece of Xylo's art, a constantly shifting, multidimensional structure that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, Leo was reminded of an animated film he'd watched as a child. It reminds me of this scene where the character discovers that what looked like chaos was actually a perfect pattern when viewed from the right perspective, he said. I was maybe 8 years old, but that stuck with me. The idea that sometimes you just need to change your viewpoint to see the order in things. To his surprise, these seemingly mundane comparisons provided Lyra with insights she hadn't expected. Your species uses narrative and metaphor to bridge conceptual gaps, she observed. This is efficient in its way. As Leo grew more comfortable in his role, he began sharing aspects of human culture that he found meaningful. Not the masterpieces of art or music that had been presented at the concourse, but the small, everyday elements that shaped human experience. He described the comfort of a hot drink on a cold morning. He showed Lyra schematics of a particularly elegant machine he'd once repaired, explaining how the simplicity of its design had impressed him. He told stories of human resilience and absurdity he'd witnessed, like the time an entire office banded together to hide a colleague's desk after he'd annoyed everyone, or how strangers would coordinate to help each other during unexpected crises. Humans are weird, he concluded after one such story. We can be completely selfish one minute and surprisingly selfless the next. We create bureaucracies that drive us crazy, then find creative ways to work around them. We're walking contradictions most of the time. The patterns within your contradictions are what interest us, Lyra said. Your species simultaneously creates problems and solutions, often with the same action. Leo laughed. That's us in a nutshell. Masters of making things complicated, then figuring out workarounds. Their interactions gradually evolved from formal cultural exchange to something approaching friendship. Lyra attempted to taste a snack Leo had kept in his pocket, a slightly stale protein bar, and provided a detailed analysis of its emotional resonance rather than its flavor. Leo helped Lyra understand an apparent human logic through a simple analogy involving traffic lights and the unwritten rules of elevator etiquette. Throughout these exchanges, Leo was vaguely aware of the continuing pressure from the human delegation. Messages arrived, first requesting, then demanding information about what was happening. Some appealed to his patriotism, others hinted at potential rewards for sharing insights, and a few contained thinly veiled threats about the consequences of going native. Leo found himself increasingly inclined to trust Lyra over his own species' representatives. The alien's directness and genuine curiosity felt refreshing compared to the layers of agenda he detected in the human communications. Your delegation's message patterns have shifted, Lyra observed one day, after Leo had dismissed yet another communication without responding. They are becoming more disordered. They're getting desperate, Leo translated. They don't understand what's happening, and humans hate not understanding things almost as much as they hate not controlling things. And you? Do you hate not controlling the situation? Leo considered the question seriously. Strangely, no. Maybe because I never had much control to begin with. My job has always been to adapt to circumstances, not dictate them. Lyra's skin patterns formed what Leo had come to recognize as her version of a thoughtful expression. This is the core pattern difference. Your leaders seek to shape reality to their desires. You seek to understand reality and work within it. Don't romanticize me too much, Leo warned. I'm plenty selfish when I want to be. I just know my limitations. Perhaps, Lyra conceded. But this awareness of limitations is itself a pattern your leaders could benefit from. She paused, her colors shifting to a more formal configuration. It is time for a decision, Leo Maxwell. The observational period is complete. A decision about what? About humanity's future relationship with the Xylos Collective. Leo felt a chill run down his spine. And I play what role in this decision? A significant one, Lyra said. Your genuine responses have provided a baseline against which to evaluate all other human communications. Your perspective has been enlightening. The implications hit Leo all at once. What had started as a bizarre case of mistaken identity, or so he'd thought, had evolved into something with potentially species-wide consequences. His random observations, practical solutions, and everyday analogies weren't just conversation. They were data points influencing an alien civilization's approach to humanity. He struggled for words. That's a lot to put on one person's shoulders. You are not alone in this, Lyra assured him. I have served as your counterpart baseline for the Xylos. Together, we have created a bridge of understanding. What happens now? Leo asked, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and strangely calm. Now, we return to the concourse, Lyra said. It is time to address your species. As Leo followed Lyra back toward the grand concourse, he couldn't help but reflect on the bizarre journey that had brought him here. Just weeks ago, he'd been a forgettable cog in humanity's vast diplomatic machine, concerned with coffee dispensers and translation servers. Now, somehow, he'd become central to whatever came next. The grand concourse looked much as it had the day Leo was selected, though the displays had been rearranged, presumably to better showcase Earth's offerings. The crowd had changed, however. Where before there had been excitement and anticipation, now Leo sensed tension and uncertainty. The human delegates watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility as he took his place beside Lyra on the central platform. A hush fell over the assembly as Lyra prepared to speak. Leo could almost feel the collective hope that she would announce some grand commercial agreement based on the technology, art, or resources humanity had offered. The corporate executives leaned forward, hands clasped. Government officials straightened their already perfect posture. Representatives of Earth, Lyra began, her voice carrying easily through the hall. The Xylos Collective has completed its observational assessment. A ripple of anticipation passed through the crowd. We have not come to announce a commercial agreement based on your presented offerings. The ripple transformed into a current of dismay. Leo saw faces fall, shoulders slump. Instead, Lyra continued, we wish to share what we have learned through our interaction with Leo Maxwell. The value we see in human resilience, adaptability, humor, and unvarnished perspective, often hidden beneath layers of ambition and performance. All eyes turned to Leo, who fought the urge to fidget under the scrutiny. The path we propose is not one of resource extraction or technological exchange, but of cautious, gradual cultural integration, beginning on a small scale, based on mutual learning. Murmurs broke out across the concourse. This was clearly not what anyone had expected or prepared for. The initial phase of this exchange will require a liaison, someone who understands both the macro scale and the practical details, someone comfortable connecting wildly different perspectives. Lyra turned toward Leo. We propose this role to Leo Maxwell. Leo felt the weight of hundreds of stares. His throat went dry. This wasn't a temporary abduction anymore. It was a job offer, one that would take him away from Earth, from his ordinary life, from everything familiar. The position would initially require your presence away from Earth, Lyra confirmed, as if reading his thoughts. You would work with me and my team to facilitate understanding between our species. Leo's mind raced. Go back to fixing coffee machines and worrying about expense reports? Or become an interspecies diplomat, helping shape the relationship between humanity and an advanced alien civilization? Put that way, it hardly seemed like a choice at all. I accept, he said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. Then, unable to resist, he added, though I should warn you, my diplomatic experience is limited to mediating disputes over the office refrigerator. Lyra's skin patterns shifted in what Leo now recognized as amusement, the Xylos equivalent of a smile. The human delegation appeared stunned. They had come expecting to negotiate resource treaties and technology transfers. Instead, they were being offered a cultural exchange program to be headed by a mid-level logistics coordinator who, until recently, had been utterly unknown. As the implications began to sink in, Leo saw the crowd's reactions transform. Some faces showed disappointment, others calculation, already thinking about how to leverage this unexpected development. But a few showed something closer to understanding, perhaps even relief that first contact had resulted in something more meaningful than a simple business transaction. For his part, Leo felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. He had no training for this, no preparation. He was, by any objective measure, spectacularly unqualified for the role. And yet, according to Lyra, it was precisely his ordinariness, his practical approach to problems, his lack of political agenda, his authentic responses that made him the ideal candidate. As the formal proceedings concluded and the delegates dispersed to digest this unexpected turn of events, Leo found himself alone with Lyra in a quiet corner of the concourse. "Are you certain about this?" he asked. "I'm really not anyone special." "That," Lyra replied, her skin patterns forming complex, beautiful sequences, "is precisely why you are exactly who we need. Not someone who sees themselves as special, but someone who sees reality clearly and works within it." "I'll probably mess up," Leo warned. Cultural misunderstandings seem inevitable. "Of course," Lyra agreed, surprising him. "Errors and adjustments are part of any learning process. We do not expect perfection, only authenticity." Leo nodded, still not entirely convinced but willing to try. "So where do we start?" "With understanding," Lyra said. "For instance, I have observed that humans require a bitter stimulant beverage each morning. You call it coffee. This seems essential to your functioning, yet its necessity was not mentioned in any official presentation." Leo couldn't help but laugh. You might understand humans better than you think. Yes, coffee is essential. Absolutely critical. In fact, my first official act as interspecies liaison should probably be to explain the concept of caffeine addiction. "I look forward to learning," Lyra said, her patterns shifting to what Leo had come to recognize as genuine enthusiasm. As they walked together toward whatever came next, Leo reflected that this was not at all how he'd expected first contact to go. There was no exchange of riches, no grand technological revelation, just the unexpected selection of an ordinary human, the beginning of a bridge built on understanding rather than transactions. And somehow, that seemed exactly right.